The 2 dark lines on that pregnancy test were the second worst thing that happened to me that year. I need you to remember I said that. Because by the time this story is over, you'll understand why a positive pregnancy test at 19, alone, broke, shaking on the edge of my aunt's bathtub, wasn't even close to the real betrayal waiting for me. The real one was already inside my own house. I just hadn't met him yet. My name is Ashley, and I need to tell you what happened before I lose the nerve. I was 19 years old, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Not because I was scared of the answer. I already knew the answer. My body had been screaming it at me for 2 weeks. The missed period. The nausea that hit every morning at the exact same hour. Like a clock I couldn't unwind. The heaviness in my chest that made my own bras feel like they belonged to a stranger. Knowing something in your body and seeing it confirmed on a little piece of plastic are 2 completely different countries, and I was about to get my passport stamped. I didn't tell Eddie that night. I wanted to be sure. Completely, undeniably, no room to wiggle out sure. So the next morning I drove across town to a clinic, gave them my blood, and waited 3 days that felt like holding my breath underwater. When the nurse finally called, her voice was almost cheerful. Positive. Confirmed. Congratulations. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after I hung up. I watched strangers walk in and out of the building, ordinary people living ordinary days, and I thought about how my whole life had just split clean in half, before that phone call, after that phone call. I pressed my hand flat against my stomach. Nothing to feel yet. No bump, no flutter, nothing. Just warmth, and the quiet certainty that something irreversible had already started growing inside me. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known with the sun heating up my dashboard and a positive blood test folded in my purse, was that the pregnancy was the easy part. The pregnancy was the prologue. The real story. The one that would tear my family apart and keep me awake at 3 a.m. for the rest of my life, hadn't even started yet. And when it did start, it wouldn't come from Eddie. It wouldn't come from a stranger. It would come from the one person in my house I was supposed to be safest around. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Back then, I was living in Greenfield, a small town about 40 minutes south of Indianapolis, sleeping in the guest room at my Aunt Linda's and answering phones at my Uncle Mark's accounting office. Nothing glamorous. I filed paperwork, organized client folders, ran errands. I'd left my mom's house in Plainfield about a year earlier because every room there still smelled like my dad, who died when I was 15, and I couldn't keep waking up in a house full of his absence. So I ran. Not far, not dramatic, just far enough to call it independence. And then I met Eddie at a friend's barbecue, and for 8 months I let myself believe every word out of his mouth. Tall, easy smile. The kind of guy who made you feel chosen. He worked at an auto body shop and talked about our future like it was already happening. Where we'd live, how many rooms, whether we'd get a dog before we got engaged. I held on to those late-night conversations like receipts for something I'd already paid for. So when that blood test came back positive, my first feeling wasn't fear. It was almost, and I know how naive this sounds now, almost excitement. Because I wasn't alone. I had Eddie. We had plans. A baby was early, sure, but it wasn't the end of the world. Not for us. I told myself that the whole drive to his apartment. I told myself that walking up the stairs. I told myself that sitting on his couch while he popped open a beer and asked me why I looked so serious. So I took a breath, and I told him. He set the beer down very, very slowly, like a man placing something fragile. And then he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not shock, not joy, not even worry. Something colder than all of those. Something already calculated. And that was the moment I realized I had no idea who I'd been sleeping next to for the last 8 months. For about 3 seconds, I actually thought he was joking. That's the part I hate remembering. 3 full seconds where my brain refused to process the look on his face, where I was searching his eyes for the punchline, waiting for the laugh, waiting for him to grab my hand and say something stupid like, "Gotcha. Babe, come here." Because that's what you do when someone you love tells you they're carrying your child. You react. Even badly. Even messily. You react like a human being who just got hit by news that's bigger than the room you're sitting in. Eddie didn't react. Eddie calculated. And that pause, that long math-doing pause where I could practically see him running numbers behind his eyes, was the moment I started losing him. I just didn't know it yet. And what does that have to do with me? That was the first sentence out of his mouth. Not "are you sure?" Not "how are you feeling?" Not "oh my God." Not even "we need to talk." Just that. And what does that have to do with me? Said the way you'd say it to a coworker handing you a receipt for lunch you didn't order. I want you to understand who I was in that moment. Because if you don't understand who I was, you won't understand why his next sentence almost killed me. I was 19 years old and I was already running on empty. I'd been running on empty for 4 years. My father died when I was 15. Heart attack, no warning. The kind of death that doesn't even let you say goodbye properly. One day, he was at the kitchen table doing a crossword and asking me about a math test. And the next day, he was a phone call from the hospital, and a hallway full of cousins I barely recognized hugging me too hard. I was the older sister, so I had to be okay. I had to hold Rachel up. I had to make my mother eat. I had to answer the door when neighbors brought casseroles. I had to be the one who didn't fall apart. Because if I fell apart, who was going to catch the rest of us? So I didn't fall apart. I stuffed every single thing I felt into a box at the bottom of my chest. And I locked it. And I threw away the key. And I learned how to smile in a way that made everyone around me feel better. That smile became my whole personality for about 2 years. People at school would say, "Ashley is so strong. Ashley is so mature. Ashley is so put together." And I'd nod and accept the compliment like it was a participation trophy, because none of them knew that strong was just a word people used for girls who weren't allowed to cry in public. The wound underneath all of that, the one I never let anyone see, was simpler than it sounded. I didn't feel chosen. Not by anyone. My dad had been the one person in the world who made me feel like the center of something, and when he died, that feeling died with him. My mom loved me. Of course she loved me. But she loved me through a fog of grief so thick that most days she could barely see through it. Rachel needed me too much to choose me, and every friend I'd had in high school had drifted off to college while I stayed behind in a town that felt like a waiting room. So when Eddie showed up at that barbecue with his easy smile and his way of asking questions like the answers actually mattered to him, I didn't just fall for him. I latched on. I latched on the way a drowning person latches onto whatever floats. I confused being noticed for being loved. Because I'd been invisible for so long, I'd forgotten there was a difference. 8 months of being looked at. 8 months of being touched. 8 months of being asked, "How was your day, baby?" That wasn't a relationship. That was a transfusion. He was the first person since my dad who'd made me feel like I was worth standing next to. And I'd built an entire future on top of that feeling without checking the foundation once. And now he was sitting on his couch with his beer set down between us like a wall, looking at me like I was a problem he hadn't agreed to solve. "What do you mean? What does it have to do with you?" My voice came out higher than I wanted. "Did I make this baby by myself?" He leaned back against the cushions, crossed his arms. "Cross them, Eddie." Like he was watching a presentation he wasn't impressed with. "Well, who told you not to be careful?" I want to be very precise about what happened to my body when he said that. Because I think every woman who's ever been blamed for something a man helped make will recognize it. There's a temperature drop, an actual physical drop, like all the blood in your face decides at the same time to go somewhere else. Your hands get cold, your tongue gets thick. The room you're in becomes about half a size smaller, like the walls just took a step toward you. You can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. Not fast, just loud, like it's the only sound in the world that still belongs to you. I sat there with my mouth open and no words coming out. He was blaming me. This man who had been there every single time. This man who had been the one to whisper, "Don't worry about it, it's fine. It'll be fine," into my hair more times than I could count, was now sitting across from me with his arms folded like a man reviewing a contract he'd never signed, and he was blaming me for getting pregnant, as if he hadn't been there, as if his body hadn't been part of the math. Eddie. My voice cracked, and I hated it for cracking. I wanted to be cold. I wanted to be a wall. Instead, I was a girl with a wobbling chin in front of a man who didn't deserve to see me cry. We've been together for 8 months. We talked about moving in together. We talked about a dog. How can you sit there and act like this has nothing to do with you? He didn't answer right away. He picked up the beer again, took a long, slow sip. The sound of him swallowing is something I can still hear in my head if I let myself think about it. And then he said the sentence that I'm going to carry with me until the day I die. Not because it was profound, because it was cruel in the most ordinary way possible. Cruel like a flat tire. Cruel like a cold draft. Look, I was already thinking about ending things between us. And now that you're telling me this, I'm jumping ship. Jumping ship. Like I was a sinking boat. Like the life forming inside me was a leak in the hull he needed to get away from before it pulled him under. Jumping ship. In a sentence, with his beer in his hand. While I was sitting on a couch, I'd helped him pick out at a thrift store 6 months ago. I want to tell you I stood up. I want to tell you I threw the beer in his face, slapped him, screamed something brilliant and devastating, walked out like a woman in a movie. I didn't. I sat there. I sat there because my legs would not have held me, and because part of me was still. And this is the worst part. This is the part I'm most ashamed of. Part of me was still waiting for him to take it back. "You can't do this to me," I whispered. "I'm carrying your child. After it's born, we'll do a test." He said it the way you'd schedule an oil change. "If it's really mine, I'll step up. Until then, you're on your own. If it's really mine." That was the sentence that finally moved me. Not jumping ship, not the arms crossed, not the beer. If it's really mine. Because those 4 words weren't just doubt. They were an accusation. He was sitting there implying I'd been with someone else, that the baby might not be his, that my word wasn't enough. 8 months of sleeping next to this man. 8 months of cooking pasta in his kitchen on Sunday nights, and leaving my toothbrush in his bathroom, and answering his phone calls on the first ring no matter what I was doing. And he could look me in the face, me, the girl who had given him every single thing she had left to give, and put a question mark next to whether I'd been faithful. Something inside me shifted right then. I want to be careful with the word, because I don't mean broke. Broken is what comes later, in a different room, on a different bed, with my face in a pillow. This wasn't breaking. This was a clicking, like a bone slipping into a new position. A position I hadn't known my body could hold. "You know what?" My voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "I don't want anything from you. Not a dollar, not a phone call, not a Christmas card. I can raise my child on my own. We're done. And this time, I'm the one who doesn't want anything to do with you." I stood up. My legs held. I don't know how, but they held. I grabbed my purse off the arm of the couch, and I walked to the door, and I did not look back. Because I knew if I looked back, I'd see him already reaching for the TV remote. And I didn't want that to be the last image of him I carried out of that apartment. I made it down the stairs without crying. I made it to my car without crying. I made it through the entire drive back to my aunt's house without crying. I want a medal for that drive, I really do, because I had to keep wiping my eyes just to see the road, and I still wouldn't let it become an actual cry. because actual crying would have meant admitting that what just happened had actually happened. I pulled into my aunt's driveway and turned off the engine and sat there for a minute with my hands at 10 and 2 and my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. My aunt's porch light was on. Someone was watching TV through the front window. Inside that house was a normal Tuesday night, and inside this car was a girl who had just been told her existence was a sinking ship. I made it to the guest room. I made it to the bed. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, and then, finally, with the door closed and nobody to be strong for, I let it come. I want to tell you it was a clean cry, the kind of cry that empties you out and leaves you peaceful. It wasn't. It was the ugly kind. The kind where you make sounds you didn't know your throat could make, where you bite the heel of your own hand to keep the noise down, where you feel like your ribs are too small for whatever is trying to get out of them. I cried for the baby. I cried for the future I'd been writing in my head on Eddie's couch. I cried for the girl at the barbecue who thought she'd finally been chosen. I cried for my dad, because every hard thing in my life eventually circled back to my dad. And then, somewhere around hour 2, I stopped crying and I started doing something that was even worse. I started planning, because that's what you do when there's a baby inside you and no one coming to help. You stop crying and you start planning. You make lists in your head. Where am I going to live? What am I going to do for money? Who am I going to tell first? How am I going to look at my mother and say the sentence I'm pregnant and the father is gone without watching her face fall apart in real time? How am I going to be a mom when I don't even feel like a person yet? The planning was almost worse than the crying, because the planning is what made it real. The crying was about Eddie. The planning was about the rest of my life. I lasted about a week in Greenfield after that night. Just a week. Every street in that town had Eddie's fingerprints on it. The grocery store where we used to fight about which brand of pasta sauce to buy. The gas station where he always topped off my tank without me asking, back when I thought that was love. The parking lot behind the movie theater where he'd kissed me for the first time and told me I was different from other girls, which is the kind of thing men say when they want you to lower your defenses. I couldn't breathe in that town. Every red light was an ambush. Every familiar storefront was a slap. So I called my mother. I sat on the floor of my aunt's guest room with my back against the bed frame, and I called my mother, and I told her everything. The test, the clinic, the couch, the beer, the jumping ship, the if it's really mine, all of it. And there was a long silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that has weight. The kind of silence you can feel through a phone. And then she said the thing mothers say when they're angry and terrified and heartbroken all at the same time. Pregnant, Ashley? My God. You're not even 20 years old. How did you let this happen? I took it. I let her say it. Because she was right, in her own way, and because I didn't have any defense left in me. I'd used it all up in Eddie's living room. But then I told her the rest. I told her how Eddie had reacted, how he'd spoken to me. How he'd folded his arms and said jumping ship like I was a problem he was solving. And my mother, my tired, careful, grief-fogged mother, went very, very quiet. Quieter than the angry quiet from a minute ago. A different kind of quiet. The kind that scared me more than the yelling. And then, in a voice I had not heard her use in 4 years, she said, "If your father were alive, he would have handled that boy himself." But my father wasn't alive. There was no one to handle anything. There was just me and a baby I hadn't planned for, and a man who had walked away from us like we were strangers asking for directions. I quit my job at Uncle Mark's office the next morning. I didn't even give 2 weeks. I packed everything I owned into one cardboard box and one duffel bag, and my Aunt Linda hugged me at the door and tried to say something and couldn't find the words, and I drove the 40 minutes back to Plainfield with my whole life in the back seat, and the blood test results folded into a tiny square in my wallet, because I didn't know what else to do with the only piece of paper that proved my life was real. I pulled into my mother's driveway at sunset. Same pale blue siding. Same flickering porch light that nobody had ever fixed. Same crooked mailbox my dad had put in the ground when I was 8 years old. I sat in the car for a long time before I went inside. The same way I'd sat in the clinic parking lot a week ago. And I thought about how I'd left this house at 18, swearing I was going to build something of my own. And now I was crawling back at 19 with a baby in my belly and a broken heart and exactly 0 plans. I didn't know it yet, but when I walked through that front door, I wasn't just walking back into my mother's house. I was walking straight into the second disaster of my life. He was already inside. I want you to picture what I saw when I pushed open my mother's front door, because the picture matters. It matters because I had no warning. I had no preparation. I had spent the entire 40-minute drive from Greenfield rehearsing the speech I was going to give my mom and my sister, and not one word of that speech had room in it for a stranger in the kitchen doorway. But there he was, average height, brown hair, cut short and clean, a clean-shaven jaw and the kind of calm, settled eyes that make you feel like the room just got quieter. He was leaning against the kitchen door frame with his hands in his pockets, the way men lean when they're trying very hard to take up as little space as possible in a house that isn't theirs yet. The second I walked in, his head turned toward me, and there was this 1/2 second where neither of us spoke and neither of us looked away, and I want to be very honest with you. I felt something in that 1/2 second. Not attraction, not yet. Something more like recognition, the way you sometimes look at a stranger and your body tells you, file this person, you're going to need to remember them. I didn't know why. I didn't trust it. I shoved it down with everything else I was already shoving down, and I plastered on the smile I'd been wearing since I was 15. Rachel hit me before anyone said anything. Just launched herself across the living room and wrapped her arms around me and squeezed so hard I almost dropped my duffel bag. My little sister. 18 years old. Loud the way she'd always been loud. All elbows and laughter and that perfume she'd worn since high school that smelled like green apples. She held me, and then she stepped back and looked at me with this confused half smile, like she was trying to figure out why I was standing in our living room on a random Tuesday with a suitcase and red eyes. That was when my mother decided to handle it for me. Your sister is pregnant, and the father doesn't want anything to do with her. She said it flat. She said it to the whole room. She said it without looking up from the dish towel she was folding, like she was reading the weather, and I closed my eyes, because I had wanted to be the one to tell Rachel, in my own words, in my own time, with my own breath behind it. Instead, my mother had just dropped the entire shape of my life onto the carpet in front of a man I had never seen before in my entire life. Rachel's face did 3 things in 2 seconds. Confusion, hurt, then a kind of fierce, protective settling. The same look she used to get on the playground when somebody made fun of my glasses in 2nd grade. She didn't say anything. She just took my hand. That's the part that broke me a little. That she didn't ask questions, didn't gasp, didn't make me explain. She just took my hand the way she had taken it at our father's funeral. And then, very gently, like she had just remembered the other person in the room, she turned and said, "Ashley, this is Robert, my boyfriend. He moved onto our street a few months ago." Robert took a step forward, held out his hand. His handshake was firm but careful, the way you'd shake hands with someone who had just been crying, even though I hadn't been crying right then. I noticed that. I noticed everything about him in that first 90 seconds, and I want to tell you it was because some instinct in me already knew. But that would be a lie I tell to make the story neater. The truth is, I noticed him because he was the only thing in the room I didn't already have feelings about. My mother was an ocean of complicated. My sister was a knot in my chest. Robert was new, and new is restful when everything else hurts. "Nice to meet you," he said. And then, because the room was drowning in awkwardness and somebody had to throw it a rope, he added, "Looking at you, you can't even tell. How far along are you?" It was such a small thing. Looking at you, you can't even tell. But he said it gently, and he said it without flinching, and he said it the way you'd say it to a friend, Not the way you'd say it to your girlfriend's pregnant disaster of a sister. I felt something in my chest unclench by maybe 1 millimeter. Not even 2 months, I said. Well? He gave me a small, real smile. Congratulations. That word. That single word. Congratulations. Do you understand how much that word weighed in that exact moment? Do you understand that I had been pregnant for 2 months, and Robert was the first human being on planet Earth to use the word congratulations about it? Not Eddie. Not the nurse on the phone, who'd said it like she said it 40 times a day. Not my mother, who hadn't been able to push past how did you let this happen. Not my Aunt Linda, who had hugged me at the door and tried and failed. Robert, a man whose last name I didn't know, standing in my mother's kitchen doorway with his hands in his pockets, was the first person to look at the situation and find the human word for it. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, all these months later. But I felt it. I felt it land somewhere underneath all the rubble, in a part of me that had been dark for a long time, and a tiny little light came on. Just for a second. Just enough to notice. Then Rachel was talking and the moment closed. She wanted to know everything. How far along? When did I find out? Was I sure? Had I been to a doctor? Did I know if it was a boy or a girl? Was I going to keep the name Ashley or use my middle name like our cousin had? The questions came fast, the way Rachel's questions always came, tumbling over each other like puppies, and I sat on the couch and answered them, and tried very hard not to look at Robert, because every time I did, I caught him looking back at me with this unreadable expression that I told myself was just polite interest. He wasn't being polite. I know that now. He was already paying attention. After about an hour, they got up to leave, and Robert shook my hand again at the door. He held it maybe a half-second longer than the first time. Maybe. I might be making that up in retrospect, the way you do when you're trying to figure out the exact moment a wound got planted in you. He looked at me and he said, "Hang in there," in a voice that was so quiet I think I might have been the only one in the room who heard it. I filed those 2 words somewhere in the back of my head and forgot about them. I forgot about them for about 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks were the slowest weeks of my entire life. I'm going to tell you about them quickly, because the slowness was the whole point. There was nothing to do but grow a baby and wait and try not to think. I helped my mom around the house. I cooked a lot, because cooking gave me something to count and measure and chop. I scrubbed the grout in the bathroom on my hands and knees one Saturday, just to feel like I was useful for something. My mother softened by inches. She stopped saying Eddie's name. She started bringing home small things from the store and leaving them on my bed without comment. A pair of yellow socks the size of my thumb, a paperback book about the first trimester, a tube of stretch mark cream that I cried over for reasons I couldn't explain. She never said the word excited. She didn't have to. The socks said it for her. And Robert came around. A lot. More than I'd expected. He'd been dating Rachel for about 3 months at that point, and he visited 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. Always polite, always easy. The kind of boyfriend you want for your little sister. The kind who clears the table without being asked, and remembers that my mother takes 1 sugar in her coffee and that Rachel takes none, and that I, after the pregnancy started, took milk and nothing else. He noticed things like that. He filed them. I want you to remember that he filed things, because it matters later. I started noticing him noticing me. Slowly. So slowly that for a long time I told myself I was inventing it. It was small things at first. The way he always said hi, Ashley specifically when he came in, like a separate greeting from the one he gave my mom and Rachel. The way he asked me how I was feeling, and then waited for the actual answer instead of accepting fine. One afternoon, he showed up with flowers for my mother. Sweet, normal boyfriend behavior. And a small paper bag for me. Inside the bag was a pound of the sour green apple candy I'd mentioned craving exactly once, in passing, 2 weeks earlier, when Rachel and I were watching TV, and I'd said I would commit a small crime for sour candy right now. He had remembered. Not just remembered, acted. 2 weeks later. without making it a thing. I thanked him. He said no problem, and went back to talking to Rachel. And I sat there with a bag of green apple sour candy in my lap, and I thought, no, you're being crazy. He's just thoughtful. Some men are thoughtful. This is what thoughtful looks like, and you've just never been on the receiving end of it before. And I believed myself more or less for another 2 weeks. Then my belly started showing. I want to talk about this part carefully, because this is the part where the air in the house began to change, and I don't want you to think I'm exaggerating in retrospect. I'm not. Around the 4-month mark, my body crossed a line. One Tuesday I could still hide it under a baggy sweater, and by the next Tuesday I couldn't. There was a bump, an unmistakable baby-shaped curve under my t-shirts. I looked pregnant. Visibly, undeniably, publicly pregnant. And something about that physical change, about my body finally announcing what had only been a private fact for months, flipped a switch in the room every time Robert was there. He started looking at me differently. I know how that sounds. I know how every woman who has ever told this kind of story sounds when she says he started looking at me differently. So let me be specific, because vague accusations aren't fair to anyone, including the version of him I once trusted. He started looking at my belly. Not glances. Looks. The kind of looks where his eyes would land on the curve of my stomach and stay there for a second too long, and then drift up to my face, and then drop to my stomach again. Like he was trying to do math he couldn't quite finish. The first time I caught it, I told myself it was curiosity. He was a man. Pregnant women are visually new information. Of course he was looking. The second time, I told myself it was nothing. The third time, I stopped telling myself things, because I was running out of explanations and starting to feel stupid for inventing them. It was on a Saturday afternoon that he made the first move that I couldn't explain away. Rachel was still in the shower. I could hear the water running through the wall. My mother was out in the backyard hanging laundry, because it was October and warm, and she liked the smell of sheets that had dried in the sun. Which meant it was just me and Robert in the living room, alone, with 2 layers of distance between us and anyone who might overhear. He sat down across from me. Not next to me, across from me, in the chair my dad used to sit in, and he started talking. Normal stuff at first. The weather. A coworker who was driving him crazy. A show he'd been watching on Netflix. His voice was easy and friendly, and exactly the same voice he used when Rachel was in the room. Then he paused. Looked at the carpet. Looked back up at me. "You know," he said, "I still can't believe your ex just walked away like that." The room shifted. Not visibly, but it shifted. The kind of shift where the temperature stays the same, but you suddenly become aware of every sound in the house. The dryer running in the laundry room, a car door closing 2 houses down, the faint hum of the refrigerator. I corrected him without thinking. Ex-boyfriend. There's nothing left between me and that man. Right. Yeah. He shook his head, slow. What a fool. The kind of guy who has everything and doesn't know it. I looked at him. I looked at him for what was probably 1 full second too long. Because that sentence, the kind of guy who has everything and doesn't know it, wasn't a sentence about Eddie. Eddie had a job at an auto body shop and an apartment with a thrift store couch. Eddie did not, by any normal definition, have everything. The sentence was about me. The sentence was Robert telling me, in a code so thin you could see right through it, that he thought I was everything, and that any man who walked away from me was a fool. I felt my face get warm. I tried to think of something to say back. I couldn't. And then Rachel came out of the bathroom in a cloud of shampoo steam, and the moment closed like a door, and Robert switched to his Rachel voice mid-sentence, like nothing had just happened. Like he hadn't just said the most loaded sentence anyone had said to me in months while my sister was 9 feet away with a towel on her head. I sat with that all night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and replayed it 100 times. and 100 times I tried to talk myself out of what I knew I'd heard. He was being kind. He was being supportive. He was sticking up for me as a future sister-in-law. You're hormonal. You're lonely. You're inventing things because Eddie made you feel disposable, and you need to feel valuable again. So you're reading romance into a kindness. I almost convinced myself. Almost. The next time it happened, 2 days later, there was nothing left to convince myself of. I was on the couch with my feet up and one of the pregnancy books my mother had bought, and Robert was across the room waiting for Rachel to finish getting ready for some concert they were going to. I looked up to ask him a question. I don't even remember what it was. Something stupid. Something about whether he wanted water. And I caught him. He was staring at me. Not at the TV. Not at his phone. At me. Specifically at the place where my t-shirt rode up over the curve of my belly. And it was not the way you look at your girlfriend's pregnant sister. It was not curiosity. It was not concern. It was the kind of look men give women they want. The long, quiet kind. The kind that has hands in it even when the hands are still in the man's lap. The kind of look I had not received from any man, including Eddie, in a very long time. He realized I'd caught him. His eyes snapped up to mine. He went red, actually red, color climbing out of his collar, and his mouth opened and closed and opened again like a fish. "What?" I said. The word came out sharper than I meant it to. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Sorry, I was just... Your belly. It's getting bigger. You can really tell now." He swallowed. He was working hard. I could see him working. I've always thought pregnant women look more beautiful. There's something about it. He said that last sentence looking directly into my eyes, and the room got very still. I could hear water running in the bathroom where Rachel was washing her face. I could hear my own heart in my ears, doing that loud, not fast thing again, the thing it did in Eddie's apartment when the world started to bend. And I thought, very clearly, with a kind of cold clarity I had not felt about anything in months, this is not normal. This is not how a man looks at his girlfriend's pregnant sister while his girlfriend is 10 feet away brushing her teeth. I muttered something I don't even remember. Thanks, I think. Or that's nice. Some little nothing word. The kind of word you use when you're trying to step backward out of a conversation that's already too big for the room. I grabbed my book and I waddled, and yes, by then I was waddling, straight to my bedroom and closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my hands against my eyes and tried to breathe. Here's what I want you to understand about that minute on the edge of the bed, because this is where everything in this story really started, and I've never told this part to another living human being. I was not horrified. I was not disgusted. I was not appalled. Those would have been easier feelings. Those would have been clean feelings. Disgust would have meant I could have walked out of my bedroom an hour later and looked Robert in the face and felt nothing. Instead, I felt something I am still ashamed of. I felt seen. I felt seen the way I had not felt seen since the moment Eddie set down his beer in his apartment 4 months earlier. Eddie had looked at me and seen a problem. The world had looked at me for 4 months and seen a cautionary tale. My own mother had looked at me and seen a daughter who had let this happen. And then this man who I barely knew, this man whose eyes I had no business being inside of. This man had looked at my pregnant body and used the word beautiful and meant it. And some hungry, lonely, half-starved part of me, the part that had been living on Eddie's table scraps for almost a year, sat up at the sound of that word like a dog at a dinner bell. That was the real disaster. Not that he'd looked at me, that I'd liked it. I sat on that bed, and I made a decision that turned out to be the most important decision I'd made since the day I left Eddie's apartment, and also the decision that did the least good in the long run. But I want to give myself credit for making it. I decided I was going to disappear. Not from the house. I had nowhere else to go. From him. I was going to make myself unfindable. I was going to become invisible the second his car pulled into the driveway. I was going to go to my room. I was going to go to the porch. I was going to go to the kitchen. Wherever Robert was, I was going to be somewhere else. I was going to build a wall out of small choices, one at a time, every single day, and I was going to keep that wall standing until either he stopped coming around, or my baby was born, or the universe handed me an exit I couldn't see yet. I told myself it would work because I am a disciplined person. I had survived my father's death by being disciplined. I had held my whole family together at 15 by being disciplined. Discipline was the one tool I trusted about myself. Whatever Robert had started by looking at me like that, I was going to end by simply refusing to be in the same room as it. I lasted 2 weeks. 2 weeks of skittering out of the living room when his car pulled up. 2 weeks of taking my dinner to my room every night he was at the house, even when my mother gave me looks. 2 weeks of not making eye contact, not laughing at his jokes, not sitting on the same piece of furniture, not even passing him in the hallway if I could help it. 2 weeks of building my wall, brick by tiny brick, telling myself that if I just held the line long enough, the feeling would die of starvation, and I could go back to being a normal pregnant girl in her mother's house with no secrets bigger than her own belly. It wasn't going to work. I think part of me already knew it wasn't going to work. But I held the line anyway, because what else was I supposed to do? And because the alternative, admitting out loud, even just to myself what was actually happening, was so much worse. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, while Rachel was in her bedroom changing out of her work clothes and my mother was at the grocery store, Robert walked into the kitchen where I was washing a glass at the sink, and he stopped behind me, close enough that I could feel him there without turning around, and he said, very quietly, "Ashley, can I ask you something? And please don't get offended." My hand stopped moving in the soapy water. The wall I had spent 2 weeks building was about to find out exactly how much it could hold. My hand stopped moving in the soapy water. I did not turn around. I could not turn around. Some animal part of me had already decided that as long as my back was to him, this conversation could not actually be happening, the way a child believes a closed closet door can hold back a monster. "Go ahead," I said. I kept my voice level. I am proud of that, looking back. Of all the small dignities I lost over the next few months, that one I held on to. My voice did not shake when I said, "Go ahead." "Are you avoiding me?" I turned the faucet off. The kitchen got very quiet. I could hear Rachel's hairdryer through the wall, a distant high whine, and underneath it the soft tick of the clock above the stove that my dad had hung up himself when I was 9 years old. "What? No. Why would I be avoiding you?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." His voice was right there. He had not moved closer, but he had not moved away either. "Every time I show up at this house, you disappear. You practically run to your room. Did I do something? Does my being here bother you?" "No, Robert. It's nothing like that." I finally turned around. I had to. Standing with my back to him was starting to feel like more of a confession than facing him would be. So I dried my hands on the dish towel and I turned. And there he was, closer than I'd thought, maybe 4 feet away, leaning one hand on the counter and looking at me with an expression I had no defense against. It wasn't predatory. That's what I want you to understand. If it had been predatory, I could have armored up. Predatory I knew how to handle. Predatory I'd handled in parking lots and at parties since I was 14 years old. Predatory makes you angry, and anger is a wall. This wasn't predatory. This was hurt. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for weeks and had finally set it down on my kitchen counter. He looked at me for a long moment. And then, very quietly, like he was afraid the words might wake something up, he said, "What would you say if I told you I've been seriously thinking about ending things with Rachel?" The floor moved. I am not being dramatic. I felt it. The whole kitchen tilted maybe 2 degrees to the left, and I had to put my hand on the edge of the sink to stay upright. Inside my stomach, the baby gave a small kick. Like, what was that? Like it had felt the world bend through the wall of my body. Ending things? Why? What would you say? I'd say that's between you and her, Robert. That's none of my business. He took 1 step closer. Just 1. But that 1 step closed the room. It is your business, Ashley, because you're the reason. Something inside my chest cracked open in a way I am still trying to put into words. It wasn't surprise. That's the worst part. I was not surprised. I had spent 2 weeks building a wall against this exact sentence, which means I had known, on some level, every single day of those 2 weeks, that this sentence was coming. The wall hadn't been built to stop the sentence. It had been built to stop me from wanting to hear it. My hands went to my belly. Not to protect the baby. To hold on to something solid. Something that was definitely mine. Something that the floor underneath me could not shake loose. I felt my own pulse against my palms. I want to end things with Rachel because of you, he said. The words came out fast now, like a man who had been rehearsing them for weeks and could no longer stand the weight of holding them in. I don't know how it happened. I've been trying to fight it. I have been fighting it, Ashley. Ever since you walked through that door with your suitcase and your red eyes, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. You're in my head all day. When I'm with Rachel, I'm thinking about you. When I leave this house at night, I'm thinking about you. When I'm at work, I'm thinking about you. I know it's wrong. I know how it sounds. I know what kind of man it makes me. But I can't pretend anymore. Don't say that. It came out a whisper. Please don't say that. My sister is crazy about you, Robert. She talks about you all day. She's in love with you. I know she is, and I feel terrible about it. I wake up feeling terrible about it. But I don't feel the same way about her anymore. And the longer I keep pretending I do, the more I'm hurting both of us. It's not fair to her. It's not fair to me. And it's not... He stopped himself, took a breath. It's not fair to you either, that I keep walking through that door and pretending. And what about me? My voice came back suddenly sharp. What about what's fair to me, Robert? You are putting me in an impossible situation. Do you understand that? You are walking into my mother's house, my sister's house, and you are asking me to carry this with you. I don't even know you. I have known you for 10 weeks. I am pregnant and broken and living off my mother's pity, and you are asking me to. I know, he said. I know, and I'm sorry. But I need you to answer me honestly. Just once. You've noticed the way I look at you. That's why you've been hiding in your room every time I come over. You felt it too. I know you did. I should have lied. I want you to understand how completely I should have lied. I should have looked at him with my coldest eyes and told him he was crazy, that I had been hiding in my room because I was tired, because the baby was making me nauseous, because I needed sleep. I should have told him to go home, wash his face, marry my sister, and never speak to me alone again. I should have made him so embarrassed that he could not look me in the eye for the next 40 years. That's what an older sister does. That's what a good older sister does. That's what the version of me my father raised would have done. Instead, I told the truth. Yes, I noticed. That's exactly why I've been avoiding you. I will be paying for those 2 sentences for the rest of my life. His face changed. Relief, mostly. The kind of relief that floods a person when they've been holding their breath for weeks. He took the last step. And before my brain could catch up to what my body was watching, he reached out and touched my cheek. Gently. The way you'd touch something you were afraid was going to vanish if you pressed too hard. And then he leaned in and he kissed me. It was not a hungry kiss. That's the part I can't explain to anybody who hasn't been in this exact situation. If it had been hungry, if he had grabbed me, pushed me against the counter, made it ugly, I could have shoved him off and felt clean about it. Hungry would have been easy. But this was soft. It was a question, asked with a mouth, in a kitchen that still smelled like the lemon dish soap I'd been using 30 seconds before. It was the kind of kiss that asks, "Is this real?" and waits for an answer. I stood there frozen, my brain screaming at me to move, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat and in my fingertips and behind my eyes. Rachel was in the next room. The hairdryer had stopped. The hairdryer had stopped. Do you understand what I mean? She could walk out of that bathroom at any second. She could walk out of that bathroom and turn the corner and see her boyfriend's mouth on her older sister's mouth in the kitchen, where our mother had taught us both how to make pancakes when we were small. I shoved him back. Hard. Hard enough that his hip hit the counter. "Stop. Are you out of your mind?" "I'm sorry. I lose my head around you. I can't control it." "Get out of this kitchen." He went. He went without another word, walked into the living room with his hands shaking, and I waddled. That is the word. There is no dignified word for how a 5-month pregnant woman moves when she is fleeing a kitchen. Straight to my bedroom, and locked the door, and slid down the back of it, until I was sitting on the floor, with my knees as close to my chest as my belly would allow. I sat there for an hour. I did not cry. The crying came later. What I did instead was something worse. I touched my own mouth. I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom with my hand pressed against my own lips, and I tried to feel where his had been, and I hated myself for trying, and I kept trying anyway. That was the night the baby kicked for the first time. A real kick, not a flutter. A small, sharp thump against the inside of my hand where it rested on my belly. The first time my child ever spoke to me from inside my own body. And I was sitting on the floor of a locked room with another woman's boyfriend's kiss on my mouth. If you want to know the exact moment I started hating myself for real, it was that one. Not the kiss. The kick. The fact that my baby chose that night to introduce itself. Robert did exactly what he said he was going to do. About a week later, Rachel came home from a date with him, with mascara streaked all the way down to her chin. She walked through the front door, and she did not even make it to the couch. She sank down onto the carpet of the entryway with her back against the closet door, and she held her phone in both hands like it was a small, dying animal, and she sobbed. My mother got to her first. I stood in the hallway. I stood in the hallway because my legs had stopped working, and because every step toward my sister was a step toward a mirror I could not stand to look into. "He broke up with me," Rachel said into my mother's shoulder. He just broke up with me, Mom. In the parking lot of the Italian place before we even ate. He said he didn't feel the same way anymore. He said it wasn't fair to keep pretending. He said," her voice cracked apart, "he said I deserved someone who was all the way in." My mother stroked her hair and made the sounds mothers make. "Shh, sweetheart. Shh, baby girl." And over Rachel's bent head, my mother looked up at me with the kind of look that a mother gives her older daughter when she expects her to come help. Because that's what older sisters do. Older sisters drop everything and come hold the younger one and say, "He didn't deserve you." I took one step forward, then another. I sat down on the carpet next to my sister, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and her head fell against my collarbone. And I felt her tears soaking into the front of the maternity shirt that was stretched over the baby that her almost fiancé had told me, 6 nights ago, that he wanted to raise as his own. "Did he say there was someone else?" my mother asked, carefully, the way you'd ask about a wound. "He didn't say yes. But he didn't say no either." Rachel hiccuped. "He wouldn't tell me her name. The way his face looked when I asked, Mom, I knew. There's somebody. There has to be somebody. He doesn't fall out of love in 3 months. Not like that. Not unless someone walked into his life. I held my sister tighter. I held my sister tighter because if I held her tightly enough, my face would be over her shoulder where she could not see it, where my mother could not see it, where nobody could see what my face was doing. "A woman knows," Rachel said, into my collarbone, into my baby, into my whole life. A woman always knows. That night, after my mother had finally gotten Rachel to sleep on the couch with one of her old quilts pulled up to her chin, I went to my room and I shut the door and I cried for the first time. Really cried. Not the controlled crying of Eddie's apartment. Not the planning cry of the guest bedroom in Greenfield. The kind of crying where your face stops being your face and turns into something raw and red and unrecognizable in the bathroom mirror. I cried for Rachel. I cried because a woman knows. I cried because she didn't. And because the only reason she didn't was that she trusted me so completely, it had not even crossed her mind. I cried because the very trust that should have protected her was the thing that was making her vulnerable. And I cried because somewhere, on the other side of that town, a man I had no business loving was probably sitting awake in his apartment hoping I would call him. My phone lit up at 2:14 in the morning. I had not turned it off. I had told myself I should turn it off, and then I had not turned it off, which is its own kind of confession. I broke up with Rachel tonight. I know you probably hate me right now. I know what tonight cost her, and I know what it cost you. But I had to. I couldn't look her in the face one more day. Please don't disappear on me. I need to know you're still there. I read it 3 times. I did not answer. The next message came at 2:31. Ashley, I know how this looks. I know what kind of man this makes me look like. But please understand something. I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for you. I would rather lose every person I know than spend the rest of my life pretending I don't feel what I feel. The next one came at 3:02, and this one is the one that broke me. This is the one I read over and over until the screen went dark, and I had to press the button to wake it back up. And then I read it again, and then I read it again. And then I covered my whole face with both hands and rocked back and forth on the edge of my bed like a child. If you gave me a chance, I would raise your baby as my own. I would love that child like it came from me. I would never let it know what the word abandoned means. I would do anything to be with you. Anything. I read those 4 sentences 7 times. I read them until the words blurred and my eyes burned, and the baby started kicking again, hard, like it was reading along with me. I want you to imagine what those 4 sentences sound like to a girl who, 6 months earlier, had been told by the actual biological father of her actual child, "If it's really mine, I'll step up." I want you to imagine the contrast. I want you to imagine how cruel it was, how unfair it was, that the man who had every reason and 0 obligation to love my baby was offering to do exactly what the man with every obligation and every reason had refused to do. I almost typed yes. I am telling you the truth, and I am telling you the worst part of the truth, which is that my thumb was on the screen, and the word yes was already half formed in my head. And the only reason I did not send it was that I heard, through the wall, my sister cry out in her sleep on the couch in the living room. Just one small, broken sound. The kind of sound a person makes when even their dreams are hurting them. I put the phone down. I pressed my forehead against the headboard of my childhood bed, and I whispered out loud, to nobody, "I cannot do this. I cannot do this to her. I will not do this to her." I made it 3 days. 3 days of not answering. 3 days of watching Rachel walk around the house like a ghost in her own life, making coffee she did not drink, opening the fridge and closing it without taking anything out, sitting on the porch in her bathrobe at 4 in the afternoon, staring at the street, like she was waiting for a car that was never going to pull up. 3 days of me being the one to bring her tissues. Me being the one to hold her hand. Me being the one she leaned her head on when she said, "I just don't understand what I did wrong." 3 days of building so much guilt inside my chest that I could feel it pressing against my lungs from the inside, the same way the baby was pressing against them from the other direction. I was being squeezed from both sides by two completely different forms of pressure, and there was no room left in my body for air. On the fourth day, Robert sent one more message. Just one. It was short. I drove past your house tonight. Your light was on. I almost knocked on the door. I didn't, because I respect your space. But I need you to know I am not going anywhere. I will wait as long as it takes. I typed 2 words. I know. I sent them. And I knew. The second the little gray delivered notification appeared under those 2 words, that I had just walked off the edge of a cliff, I was not going to be able to climb back up. I sat there in the dark with my phone glowing in my hand, and the baby moving inside me. And from the living room, very faintly, I heard Rachel start to cry in her sleep again. And this time when she cried, I did not get up to check on her, because I could not face her. Because the older sister who used to climb into her bed and rub her back was already gone, replaced by a woman who had just texted I know to the man who had broken her heart. That was the night I stopped being able to look myself in the mirror. And it was only going to get worse from there. The truth came in 2 pieces, on 2 different days, from the 2 men who had ruined my life from opposite directions. And both pieces arrived in the same week. Eddie called first. I had not heard his voice in 5 months. I had blocked his number, deleted his contact, scrubbed him out of every corner of my phone like a stain. So when an unfamiliar Indianapolis area code lit up my screen on a Tuesday afternoon, and I picked up without thinking, and I heard him say, "Hey, Ashley, it's me," my whole body went cold from the inside out, the way a glass of water goes cold when you drop ice into it. "What do you want, Eddie?" "I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing, how the pregnancy is going." Check in. 5 months of nothing, and the man wanted to check in. I stood in the hallway of my mother's house, one hand on the wall to keep myself upright, and I felt every single thing he had said to me on that couch come rushing back at once. Jumping ship. If it's really mine. Who told you not to be careful? "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said. "And I want to be there. When the baby comes, I want to be involved." I almost laughed. I want you to know that. I almost laughed out loud into the phone, because the timing was so perfectly, mathematically convenient. 7 months along, visibly pregnant, the point where the baby was no longer a theoretical problem he could disappear from, but a real, coming, undeniable child who was going to have his last name on a piece of paper somewhere whether he showed up or not. He had not had a change of heart. He had had a change of math. Somebody, a cousin, a coworker, a friend of a friend, had told him I was actually doing this, and Eddie had run the numbers and decided that being the dad who came back played better at family barbecues than being the guy who walked away. "Don't bother," I said. "I told you 5 months ago I didn't need anything from you. That hasn't changed." "Ashley, come on. You can't keep me from my own kid." "Watch me," I said. And I hung up. And my hands were shaking so hard, I had to set the phone down on the hallway table because I couldn't trust myself to hold it. But here's the thing about Eddie's call. The thing I didn't see coming. It didn't make me hate him more. It made me terrified. Because for the first time in 7 months, I understood that there was a man out there with a legal claim on the child inside me. A man who could show up. A man who could demand a paternity test. A man who could complicate every single plan I had been quietly, secretly building in the back of my head about a future that did not include him. And every one of those plans, every single one, had Robert's face in it. That was when I knew. Not in a brave way. In a small, quiet, scared way. The way you know things at 3 a.m. when the house is silent and your hands are still cold from a phone call. I love him. That was the sentence in my head. I love him. And I've been lying to myself for 2 months about how much. The second piece of the truth came 3 days later, in a park, under an oak tree that was just starting to lose its leaves to October. I had run into Robert outside the pharmacy on Main Street, completely by accident, and he had asked me for 5 minutes, and I had given them to him because I was too tired to keep saying no. We sat on a bench, not touching, and the air smelled like rain that hadn't started yet. And he looked at the ground, and then at the sky, and then at me, and he said, "I need to tell you something I've never told anyone." "Okay." "I can't have children, Ashley." The bench tilted under me. I turned my head, and I looked at him, really looked at him, and watched his jaw work like he was chewing on a word he had spent years not saying out loud. "I'm sterile. I found out 2 years ago. I went to a doctor for something else, and they ran tests, and then more tests, and then a specialist, and the specialist sat me down in his office and told me I had a 0% chance. Not low, 0. I am never going to be a father. Not biologically. Not ever. And in 1 second, every single thing I had ever wondered about Robert rearranged itself in my head like furniture being shoved into the right room. The way he had looked at my belly. The way he had said the kind of guy who has everything and doesn't know it. He had not been talking about me. He had been talking about the baby. The child Eddie had thrown away. The one thing in the world that Robert was never going to get to have on his own. The flowers for my mother. The sour candy for me. The patient way he had waited and watched for 2 months. He hadn't been seducing me. He had been applying. Quietly, carefully. The way a man applies for the only job he wants, knowing he's competing against nothing but a memory. "Is that why?" I whispered. "The baby? Is that why you want me?" He looked at me, and his voice broke clean in half. "No, I want you because I am in love with you. I fell in love with you the day you walked through that door with red eyes and a duffel bag, and I have been in love with you every day since. The baby is not the reason. The baby is a gift. A gift I never thought I was going to get to be near in this lifetime. But Ashley, even if there was no baby, I would still be sitting on this bench right now begging you for a chance." He kissed me then. And this time, I kissed him back. Not gently. Not carefully. I kissed him like a woman who had been holding her breath for 7 months, and his mouth was the surface of the water. I kissed him with all the loneliness and the grief and the wanting and the guilt and the fear, and for about 90 seconds, I have counted them. In the months since, I have counted those exact 90 seconds more times than I care to admit. For about 90 seconds, the entire world was small and warm and exactly the shape it was supposed to be. Then I pulled away, and the cold rushed back in. I went home that night and I tried to tell Rachel. I want you to know I tried. I sat down next to her on the couch on a Sunday afternoon while my mother was at church, and my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, and I had the entire confession lined up in my mouth. "Rach, I have to tell you something. It's about Robert. He has feelings for me, and I have feelings for him too, and I am so sorry. I am so sorry." What came out of my mouth was, "He texted me the other day asking how you were doing." I lied. I lied straight to my little sister's hopeful face. And I watched that lie land in her eyes and turn into a small, fragile, devastating hope. And I watched her say, "See." I knew he still cared. And I nodded. And I smiled. And I felt something inside my chest fold up like a paper bird being crushed in a fist. I could not do it. I had walked all the way up to the edge of the truth, and I could not jump. And that is where I am tonight. 2 weeks from my due date, sitting on the edge of the same bed I slept in when I was 9 years old. The blood test results from that clinic in Greenfield are still folded into a tiny square in my wallet. The crease is permanent now, the word positive worn soft from being unfolded too many times. In the next room, Rachel is humming a song our father used to play on the car radio when we were small. In an apartment 6 miles away, Robert is waiting for an answer he has been waiting for since October. Somewhere out in this town, Eddie is circling, threatening to complicate everything with lawyers and DNA tests, and a version of fatherhood that has nothing to do with love. And inside me, a baby who did not ask for any of this is running out of room, pressing on my lungs, getting ready to arrive in a world its mother has not figured out yet. I could tell Rachel everything tomorrow. I could rip it open, let her scream, let her hate me, accept that the cost is my sister, and pray that years from now, maybe many, many years from now, she might find her way back to me. I could walk away from Robert instead. Tell him no. Tell him never. Raise this baby alone the way I once swore I would in Eddie's apartment, before I knew what alone actually meant. I could keep doing what I am doing right now, which is choosing nothing, which is the slowest and quietest way a person can betray everyone she loves at the same time. I do not know which one I am going to do. I want to lie to you and say I do. I want to give you a clean ending, the kind where the woman finds her courage and makes the brave choice and the credits roll. But that would be one more lie. And I have told enough lies in this house to last me the rest of my life. What I know is this. My baby is going to be born in 2 weeks. And on the day my baby is born, I am going to have to be somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, and maybe, if I am brave enough, or selfish enough, or desperate enough, somebody's partner. And I am only going to get to be 3 of those 4. I do not yet know which one I will lose. Through the wall, my sister is still humming. The song is one our father loved. And I am sitting here in the dark with my hands on my belly, listening to her voice, listening to the small, new heartbeat inside me, and waiting for an answer that I am terrified is already inside me, just waiting for me to be brave enough to hear it. What would you do in this situation? Be honest. Or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.